Hello, BookTube. I went to the Brattle Bookshop first thing this morning. For those of you who are new to this channel, although I gather there aren't any of you who are new to this channel, or not many. I get emails from people saying I'm new to your channel. I just found you, all sorts of nice things. All sorts of people sort of tentatively wondering if all the impressions I get of this channel could really be real. Is this really your email address? Are you really going to write back? Are you really just here as a person instead of a weird plastoid Logan Paul creature? But one of my YouTube friends, I have 4 friends who do YouTube for a living, 2 of them for a very good living, and one of them, I give them all of my information, but apparently there's a website, I forget what it's called. Blade is in part of the title, I think. Apparently there's a website, or maybe there are many websites, where you can just look up the progress, the health in subscription traffic of a YouTube channel. And one of my young friends did that, and he emailed me just the other day, just lamenting, saying, "Oh, dude, it looks like you're flatlining. Do you want to collab?" And I said, "No, I don't." It's first of all, the word's collaborate, not collab, and no, I don't want to. I don't want to collab with you, especially since I want to flatline. I don't want to run the risk of doubling or tripling the size of this channel. So I'm perfectly okay. But it was his impression that my subscribers are not going up. I have not called out the dude bros. I have not called out any other frauds anywhere on YouTube, and that tends to be the thing to do it. So maybe I should keep my head below the parapet. But for those of you who might be new to the channel, the Brattle Bookshop is a used bookstore in the heart of downtown Boston. And they're terrific. Absolutely terrific. They're very old. I've been going there for a very long time. Half a century that I've been a customer there, paying wisecracking customer there. And they have 3 floors. The 3rd floor is the sort of pricey antique or antiquarian books, a little more pricey, where you could go up there and you could spend $1,000. And it's locked unless there's a customer who needs it, and the books are carefully tended to, and they're in climate-controlled cases and all of that. Very much a store that will serve that need if you have that need. Very much so. It's not a need that I ever had, so it's not a need that I stress when I talk about the Brattle, but it is definitely true. If you have a bookish friend or maybe a book connoisseur friend and you would like to, they've got a very important birthday or anniversary coming up, and I really want to get them, I want to get them a book, but I want to get them a special kind of book. Well, those of you who watch this channel regularly know already what I think. A battered to hell and gone old paperback that lifted you out of yourself, that raised the hairs on your hand. That is a very special book. But if you know what I mean, some sort of collectible item. Well, you can go up to the 3rd floor of the Brattle and find them something. But the 1st and 2nd floor are just a jam-packed, normal used bookstore, crammed with stuff in every subject under the sun. And the turnover is enormous. The first thing you encounter when you walk into the Brattle Bookshop is a gigantic buying table. It's just a huge space that is always changing, because that's where the books are worked on. The books come, to the shop. That's where the staff works on them. What is this? Where's it going? What price is going to go on it or whatnot? And that has such enormous traffic at all times that the books in the shop change constantly. And as if that all weren't enough, the shop also has a lot next door. A big, empty lot next door. They could make a killing if they let cars park there, but instead they fill it with books. Thousands and thousands more books at bargain prices, $1, $3, and $5. And it's not junk. It's not like they get 5 boxes from somebody, and one of the boxes, the books are all waterlogged and mildewed, so let's put those out in the sale lot, as some other used bookstores do. Not looking at you, Strand. No, it's not that at all. They're perfectly good stock. They would be the stock in a normal used bookstore. It's just the Brattle gets so much stock that they can rotate a lot of it out there. I spend most of my time out in the sale lot, and I always have, which can be a bit of a trial because it's open to the elements. It's not protected in any way. And today was a crisp day. Today was a crisp day. This morning, first thing, I'm always up right as dawn is changing the sky. I don't actually see the dawn because it happens. I'm cupped in the hand of a ridge, so dawn happens over the ridge. I get daylight, but I don't get dawn light. But I do see the change. I do see dawn light in the air, and I start in the bed, my little pre-World War I bed over in the little book room. Frida might be sound asleep. Frida is not a morning person at all. She sleeps very soundly in the morning and does not want to get up. One of the first dogs I've ever had that was like that. It's very human of her. But I'm wide awake once that dawn light starts to change the sky. And when it did this morning, it was chilly. Actually chilly. And it was a perfect arch of a day in terms of weather. It was a beautiful day, first of all, bright and sunny. And no wind, no rain, no nothing like that. But it was a beautiful day in terms of the normal, natural arch of the day. The morning was chilly. So you're maybe a little reluctant to poke your nose out of bed, and you got to walk around a bit in the dawn light in order to get the blood pumping, and maybe have hot tea or something like that to get yourself warm. And then the day gets warmer until from 11 until 4:30. The day is perfectly fine. Not bitingly cold. Don't need a hat. Don't need gloves. Not anything like that. Chill, but not cold. And you know when you're in the middle of that perfectly natural arch that, of course, as daylight fades and darkness comes on, as night comes on, it's going to get chillier. But not life-threatening cold. I think some of you have been watching this channel for a long time will remember last year and the year before that, there was a patch in each winter, those 2 years, where forecasters were warning people about their life because it was going to get to 20 or 30 below zero overnight. Not anything like that. Instead, a day like this is just perfect. But I was at the Brattle first thing. The doors were still creaking. I was there first thing, and it was pretty chilly out in that lot. Not nearly as cold, outright cold and freezing, as my friend Deb and I have known it many, many a time, where I have constantly warned her, let's go to the Brattle and freeze your giblets off. So it was wonderful to browse. And I've had a bunch of books, and I want to show them to you. I had a very, very good day at the Brattle. Start off with 2 mass market paperbacks, the first of which I never thought I would see again. It's a historical novel from the 1960s, Tudor fiction that's really good, really textured Tudor fiction. It's by Godfrey Turton, and it's called My Lord of Canterbury. And the cover copy says that it is the best-selling novel of Henry VIII's mysterious and indestructible Archbishop. And this is Archbishop Cranmer. And I saw that cover a long, long time ago when I first read this book. It has the classic oxidized pages and whatnot. I read that cover a long, long time ago when I first encountered this book, and I thought, what on earth do you mean, indestructible? what on earth? I remember holding this book when I saw it for the first time, before most of you were born, and saying, you cannot possibly intend to make Cranmer a hero. You cannot possibly intend to do that. It's not possible. Little did I know that one of the greatest works of Tudor historical fiction was coming 40 years from now, in which someone would try to make Thomas Cromwell a hero and succeed. With violence to historical record, in my opinion, but it doesn't matter if it's as good as Wolf Hall. This is not as good as Wolf Hall, but it is still very good. It just fails. That's all. It doesn't fail as a novel. It's very dramatic and moving as a novel, whether you know anything about Cranmer's life or not. But it fails to make a hero of him, and how could it? I mean, how could it? I mean, Cranmer rose to power on his religious zealotry. Now, that religious zealotry gave us something imperishable. It gave us the Cranmer Prayer Book, which is amazing. It is an amazing work of literature. It's a hot powder keg of a thing. You can't put it in most English literature curricula because it's explicitly religious. And I've always thought that was a shame. Because whatever else Cranmer was, and he was a lot of things, I myself believe, I know it's a contested issue, but I myself believe that he wrote almost every word of the original prayer book. And those words are gorgeous. They are as good a prose as anything that came out of the early Tudor years. I won't match it quite against Queen Elizabeth, but in some sections I could. Definitely in some sections I could. If you were ever at a used bookstore and you saw a battered old copy of the Cranmer prayer book in a paperback of some kind or other, it's the type of thing you would glance right past because you think, oh, it's church service, so not going to be of any kind of interest to me as a reading experience. And that's not true. That's absolutely not true. So there was that, but there was a lot of horrible stuff too. Cranmer, he wrung his hands a lot. He loved to wring his hands, but he racked, tortured, and burned a lot of heretics. A lot of people he considered heretics because they wouldn't abandon the Catholic Church. The church. not the church with a capital C, the church that had been the religion of the people in England for 1,000 years. He wouldn't abandon that church. As he wanted other people to abandon that church. He wanted them to embrace the idea of a new church, the Church of England. And when they didn't do it, he might wring his hands a lot, but he was perfectly willing to rack them, torture them, starve them, beat them, dispossess their families, and have them burned to death. And watch while they were burned to death. And you might read historical accounts of famous people being burned to death, and you're told that they had a little sack of gunpowder strapped under their chin, so that when the heat reached the gunpowder, it would blow their head off, and they would be spared the agony of the death of being burned to death. Don't be fooled by those accounts, okay? If a famous people always had witnesses writing down the details in the audience. If every famous person in history that historical anecdote says had one of those pouches and actually had it happen, the records would be full of such mentions. Usually people didn't have that. Usually they didn't. I mean, if you're a prisoner in the Tower of London and your moment is coming, it's the morning of the last day of your life, and you've made an arrangement with the man the postman, the man who will be at the post up on the scaffold, to put one of those things around your neck. And it's grisly, it's gruesome, but you know perfectly well that if it's there, you will be spared a lot of agony. Let's say you get all the way to there and you are tied to that post and there's kindling all around you and people are starting to light it on fire, and that man just pockets your money and doesn't do it. Maybe he's a sadist. Maybe he doesn't agree with the reasons why you're in prison. What are you going to do? You're not going to do anything. You don't have any recourse at all. But anyway, the reason why I stress how gruesome it is to burn someone alive because they don't share your opinions about something is pointed when it comes to Cranmer, because one of the risks you run when you rise high in a monarchy, on the base of the monarchy, in the monarch's hand, one of the risks you run is that your monarch will change. They're people. They're individuals with personalities. And they have nothing to constrain them from acting on that. Now they do. But at the time, they didn't. And Cranmer rose in the service of Henry VIII. And Henry VIII's son was a carefully groomed religious zealot who wanted to continue furthering Cranmer's campaign of remaking the church, remaking the liturgy, remaking the nature of faith, so that it's not faith and works anymore. It's just faith. That's all you need. And also remaking the prayer books. There were whole rebellions over the Cranmer prayer book. But Edward was a fanatic. He would have been worse as he grew older. But that's what I mean. That's the risk you run. Cranmer's monarchs died. And the monarch who came to power was Queen Mary. And Queen Mary was a Catholic. And not only a Catholic, but a vengeful Catholic. She very much hated the things that Cranmer and his ilk had done to the country. And so he was arrested. And he was held in prison, in confinement of one kind or another, gentle or otherwise, for a long time. Many, 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 many months. And he was presented with his alternatives. He was told, the Queen Mary hates you. She doesn't just hate what you represent. She hates you personally. She thinks you're the main architect of this. She was entirely right about that. She wants you to die. Now, there's a procedure here. There is a procedure here. It's the rule of the monarch, of course, cannot be gainsaid. But there is a procedure here, and most monarchs are perfectly willing to abide by it. They don't want trouble. Most of them don't. And the procedure is that if you grovelingly recant your heresy from the Church of Rome, your sentence will be commuted. You won't die. You won't be burned to death. And Cranmer did. He did. He recanted. Repeatedly, effusively, heartfeltly, he recanted. You won't really, if you just know a thumbnail of his history, you won't really know that. All you'll know is that at the end, at the very end, right at the end, when he knew, when Mary said, I don't care if he recants, and I don't care what the principle or what the procedure is. I want this man personally dead. And when the prince, in this case princess, when the queen, in Tudor times, tells you, I want this man personally dead, the parenthesis in the back of that is, if it doesn't happen, I'll want you personally dead, and that will happen. So it happens. And once Cranmer learned that, he recanted his recantation. Said that he believed everything that he'd originally said and took back his recantation. And he was put to death anyway. And the last line of this book I haven't read this in so long. Yeah. There was no sound except the crackle of the flames as they gathered strength to envelop him. Then suddenly he called out, I see heaven open and Jesus waiting. The last lines of the book are, he never spoke again, he died quickly. And both of those aren't true. We have lots of eyewitness accounts of the death of former Archbishop Cranmer. He screamed and cried out all sorts of things. First, relatively sensible, and then garbage, gibberish, and he took a long time to die. So he didn't have one of those pouches around his neck. He didn't die quickly. It's a horrifying death to be burned at the stake, obviously. But the thing that makes him unsalvageable, as that you can't make a hero out of him, is that he put people to that death. That horrible, lingering, dehumanizing, grotesque death of dying at the stake for beliefs he was willing to recant to save his own skin. You can't read. We have the text of his when he recanted, the many times that he did. He tried it 3 or 4 times. Wrote out the documents. We have those texts. There is no possible way for you to read those texts and think he was lying, or that he meant for the right people to read those texts and see that he was lying. No, he meant it. He meant it. Which means he never believed those things. Maybe that isn't true when it comes to your opinion about, the new Dune movie. But if you're talking about being inspired by God to speak the truth about a 2,000-year-old church, then it stands to reason you had better be able to die for those beliefs. What else, if in his line of work, in his world, what more could you die for? Whether he believed it or not, he was perfectly willing to kill people who refused to recant. And then when he was told, you have a month more to live if you don't recant, he recanted. I'm worked up already. Just one book. This is going to be a delight to read again. I'm so happy that I found it. I used to have a little body of Tudor historical fiction. I'm gradually building it back up. This next one is also a mass market paperback. It's a Penguin mass market paperback from eons ago, 50 years ago, of a great book. That this is not the ideal format. Mass market paperbacks aren't really the ideal format. You have to reinforce them. The binding is not meant to last. They were meant to be cheap. But this is Philip Zegler's book on the Black Death in an old Penguin. That's seen better days. This has been read many times. And it always amazes me about this book. This is the best single book on the bubonic plague, on the Black Death, that anyone's ever written. I know that some of you who watch this channel with religious fervor of your own might think, well, he's just biased because he loves Philip Zegler, but the proof is in the pudding. It's not that I'm biased because I like Philip Zegler. It's that I like Philip Zegler because he never fails me in a book. And this is amazing. Absolutely amazing as an account of the Black Death. And the thing that mystifies me about it had this mass market paperback. This was meant for people, heading into London to work all day long, to grab on a rack at the train platform. This was not meant to still be here now in 2022 or 2021. It still is, and that's great. That's a marvelous thing. And it's still readable. Not one of those delicate things on the 3rd floor of the Brattle, but you'd want a better form for a book this good. And the forms that I've seen of this, there was an awkwardly shaped hardcover with illustrations. There was a trade paperback that was so rotten in the way it was constructed. It had the Grim Reaper on the cover that it fell apart. I used to get it by the bucket load because every time I tried to read it, it fell apart. If there's probably a better edition of this, for all I know, maybe Folio Society or somebody like that does a really good edition of the Black Death. What I'd really like is, a Penguin Classic or something that's just made to be read. But I'll take this. Absolutely. Absolutely. Where am I going to put these things? Okay, then we'll deal with, is this almost the last paperback. This is a great series from Johns Hopkins University Press. I wonder if the series has a name. Yes, Ancient Society and History. The series has a name, the Ancient Society and History series. This is the ancient Roman city, but there was a whole line of books like this, and they all look like this. They all were these white trade paperbacks with the artwork in the middle of the cover and white all around them. And this is all about what the Roman city conception was. Cities, suburbs, neighborhoods, all that sort of thing. I had this years and years. I had this when it first came out. 1988. I had this in 1988 and loved it. The minute I saw it this morning, I realized not only did I not have a copy, but it's been a long time since I did. No idea where such a thing goes. No idea at all, but very glad to have it again. Although, again, I want to stress, if you see a book like this, make sure it's not highlighted, because these things once upon a time, they did show up in curriculum. Then this next one I got for the translator, even though I can read the original. It's not the only example of that in this book haul. The translator is Burton Raffles. The other day we saw I hauled a little mass market copy of his translation of Beowulf, which he did 80 million years ago, and which sold like griddle cakes. I mean, it is still the little Beowulf that schools use. A lot of them do. I think a lot of schools may have switched over to Seamus Heaney's translation, but only because it's in the Norton Critical Edition, and Burton Raffles is not. But for a long time, his Beowulf sold. And, Beowulf is a bit daunting, a bit mystifying to try and read in the original. But the book that I got today, I actually got it from the publisher when it first came out, but I got rid of it, and I'm glad to have it back. And that is Burton Raffles' translation of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, and this lovely thing with a plastic binding on it. This came out much later from Modern Library. The Modern Library did this in 2008, and I got a copy through Open Letters Monthly, and may have written about it. I may have written about it. It's a little bit odd in this case that you'd think that I would want it. I actually did want it, and I want it in the hardcover. It's a little bit odd that you'd think I'd want it because, as I've mentioned on this channel many times, Chaucer is well within your reach. He's not like the original manuscript of Beowulf. If you see Chaucer's English on the page, you're well on your way to understanding it. And it takes only a little bit of work to understand it completely and naturally, smoothly, so that you don't need a translator Englishifying it. You don't need a translator putting it in the vernacular. And you lose things when a translator does that, whether it's Neville Coghill or whether it's Burton Raffles. You lose things. Chaucer was very adroit at word choice, and a lot of the words that he was very adroit at don't exist anymore. So a modernizer, a modern translator, so to speak, has to take them out. And if you do that, you lose what the game that Chaucer was playing with that particular word. The only way you'll get it back is to do an equivalent game with a modern word at Chaucer's level of skill. That's not going to happen. So, but nevertheless, I have a sweet tooth for translations of works I can read in the original. I have a sweet tooth for that. I always have. And I remember finding this very interesting. I'm going to read. It's got a long introduction. It's got a long translator's preface, and then I'll read. Well, let's see. Just to jog my memory, let's see what Burton Raffles does with the famous opening line of the general prologue. Even people who don't know this book usually are at least familiar with that. So what do we have here? When April arrives, and with his sweetened showers, drenches dried up roots, gives them power to stir dead plants and sprout the living flowers that spring has always spread across these fields, and the god of the winds then blows his gentle seeds, and every wood and heath of England feeding tender crops, as the sun, still young in the sky, compels small birds to sing their melodies, creatures who sleep at night with open eyes, exactly as nature frames their lives' short ages. Then people think of holy pilgrimages. Pilgrims dream of setting foot on far-off lands, or worship at distant shrines, their thoughts reaching for grace as holy teachers taught them. Okay, well, you can see. You can see what I'm talking about there, right? That when April arrives, comma, and with his sweetened showers, introduces a pause where Chaucer didn't want one. And why would you do that? Why would you... You could easily picture Chaucer at his workbench saying, well, no matter what I do, I don't want to pause in the middle of the very first line of my poem. And there it is. And little things like what Burton Raffles does with the God of the Winds, that sort of thing, where you interpolate. In order to do that, you will have to do violence to the rhythm. I mean, to the actual feet of the line. But maybe not irreparable violence. I haven't sat down and studied this. I remember I liked it a lot more than Peter Ackroyd's version, but I was glad to find it. Very much glad to find it. Then these next three are of a pattern. I've mentioned many times before. The Brattle has a karma. The Sale Lot has a karma. The Inside Shop does not. The Inside Shop is just a great used bookstore. I say. There aren't many left in the world that are as good as the Brattle. But the outside carts are all random. They're not organized in any way except by price. So if you find a pattern or an inspiration, you have to go with it. You can't try to impose your own on the Brattle carts. Not only will that fail, but it will mean you don't get anything. It will mean no books for you. The gods of the Brattle carts are generous but fickle. So if you encounter a pattern, you have to just go with it. You have to just go with it. You have to accede to the karma of the carts. You can't look, if you look at one of the carts out in the Brattle and suddenly you see I don't even know. Let's say it's a subject you're interested in, right? Because no one's going to expect you to buy a book on a subject you're not interested in just because you see a line of books about it. Let's say it's a subject you're interested in. Let's say Belle Opec France, or Marie Curie and the science of her era, or Einstein. Okay, that's a good one, Einstein. Let's say you're interested in Einstein and the periods of his life and the scientists that he knew, and the politics that surrounded all of his scientific discoveries. Let's say you're interested in that, but it's the farthest thing in the world from what you're thinking about. Let's say you went to the Brattle to look for mystery fiction. And you're searching, you're looking through the carts, and you're trying hard not to look for mystery fiction, because if you specifically look for something, you won't find it. And suddenly you encounter a book on Einstein, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one. You'd better go with that. You'd better go with that. That you have to take what the Brattle gods give you. If you do, they'll be generous with you, but only if they've seen that you are compliant. And that's what these next three are. I was not expecting them in any way, and I snatched them up right away. They're Civil War military history, American Civil War military history. A surefire symptom, an old friend of mine used to say, a surefire symptom that you are not just interested in the Civil War, but a Civil War buff, he always said it with a drip of sarcasm, is if you are no longer interested in the war and the movements and the personalities only. Where in addition to that, you are now interested in who jumped what fence in which battle. If you achieve that interest, that's when you know that you have entered into buff territory. And I guess that's me, because I've always been interested in that. And I found the first one is by Peter Cousins, he's done some really well-respected books on the subject, and this is one of them. This is This Terrible Sound, his big book on the Battle of Chickamauga. This is a little bit of a sun-faded spine, but this is the definitive work on the Battle of Chickamauga, and the Battle of Chickamauga is an incredibly pivotal battle. It's easily possible to study the American Civil War without caring about the battles. That is heresy, but it is true. It is easily possible to do that. But if you do care about the battles, this is a big one. And that's fantastic. I know that this book is well respected because it crops up in a million bibliographies. And I got a copy just recently, but I sent it somewhere else. I didn't keep it. And this next one is also by Peter Cousins. And this is The Shipwreck of Their Hopes. This is all of the different battles in and around the Chattanooga. In an attempt to get at the South, in an attempt to strangle estuary trade and get at the heart of the resistance. It's not quite as big, but I believe this is every bit as definitive, and that's fantastic. I've never even seen this at the Brattle before. And then the last one is not by Peter Cousins, but talk about definitive. It's a book on the Battle of Shiloh that has a fascinating history. It's this thing. It's Shiloh and the Western Campaign of 1862. It's by O. Edward Cunningham. And you notice it's got editors down below. And you might wonder, if it's a big, thick book on Shiloh, why would it need editors? And the reason is because this author wrote this as a dissertation years ago, in the 60s. And his teachers were blown away by it. It's full of original research. Even that original version was full of not only wonderful writing, but original research. The classic example of somebody looking at the records of a major historical event and just rethinking it. Okay, what does this actually tell us? You've made this contention about this item of this battle a million times. I've read it in a million different accounts of this battle, but it looks to me like every account is getting it from the account before them. Where does it actually come from in fact? Is it factually true? And all of those people were fascinated by this book, the rumors of it, this dissertation. And then the author died, and these two editors came forward to polish the book and print it for an audience. So 10 years later, it came out as a book. And it is the definitive work on Shiloh that reassesses every single bit of received, legendary history and does a great job of it. So I got 3 Civil War military histories at the Brattle. Fantastic. And then we're not quite done with military histories in this haul, because I also found a hardcover copy of Adrian Goldsworthy's book on the Punic Wars. And I like Adrian Goldsworthy. I enjoy his histories. And this is about Rome fighting Carthage. 3 separate wars. I had this once upon a time. I've had it many times. I've recommended it many times for people who want an overview of the Punic Wars before they dig in to individual battles, individual people, individual war. Once upon a time, decades and decades and decades ago, I knew somebody who decided that he was going to study the first Punic War. course, the Second Punic War has Hannibal, so everybody studies that. But he wanted to study the First Punic War. And this is a really good overview, really knowledgeable of all three. And Goldsworthy makes it absolutely clear at the beginning and at the end of this book that this is an informed military history for the general interest reader. This is not meant to be a scholarly monograph. I think it's good when a historian just says that and then does it. That's just great. There's no shame in that at all. Then this next one is kind of weird. It's the other paperback here, but it's kind of weird. I may have seen this in the past, but it jumped out at me right away. It's a big, oversized translation of all the poems of Catullus. It's this. You've got a very interesting cover design where you've got these scribbles of notebook pages, and the translators are Celia and Luis Zukowski, and the book is bilingual. So you've got each of Catullus's poems on a page with the Latin on one side and the English on the other. And it's a trade paperback, and it doesn't feel like a particularly well-made trade paperback, so I would ordinarily have balked, but when am I going to see this again? When am I going to see a hardcover of this? And as an experience in maybe, this is another example of me getting a book, a translation of a work that I can read in the original, and that always loses a huge amount in any translation, no matter how careful, no matter how skillful. So, on one level, you might think, and friends of mine, bookish friends of mine over the decades have asked, well, then why would you do that? I find it fascinating. I just find it fascinating what different translators do every once in a while. In fact, a lot of times, I'd say probably 40% of the time. Some new English language translator will give me a new version of these poems or these works that I know and love. That's fascinating. That's invaluable. It could very well be that I get a new Catullus out of this book. I get little new Catulluses from a lot of his different translators. I'll take it, absolutely. If it's ham-handed, it might still be nice to have the bilingual, the facing page, Latin and English. And even if that's not nice enough, if the book starts to crack and fall apart, which I expect is going to happen, it certainly was no skin off my nose to do. It was all very cheap. These were all very cheap, including this last one. This is the last one. It's an oversized hardcover with, it doesn't have the same kind of plastic cover on it that the Canterbury Tales did, but it does have a kind of plastic cover. It's looser. And this is Peter Green's great book on Alexander the Great, with a, this is meant to be kind of a quasi coffee table book, so it doesn't have blurbs on or description on the back, and it has a classical painting on the cover. And Peter Green is, well, he's a great classicist. Affiliated with the University of Iowa, as you would expect. He's a great classicist. And this is widely regarded as, one of the great modern biographies of Alexander the Great. Of course, with Alexander the Great, you're dealing with the same handful of sources. I mean, it doesn't take more than a year to master the primary sources of Alexander. And after that, if you're going to write a big book that's going to be taken seriously about him, in addition to having mastered all of those sources, you have to go elsewhere. You have to master, for instance, the long history of legend in the East that grew up around Alexander. You have to walk the ground everywhere. You have to go in person and walk the ground. There have to be photos of you doing that, et cetera, et cetera. But the primary sources, they're not what we wish they could be for such a major figure. They're not what we wish they could be. But this is a great book. It's a great biography of Alexander, and I have a handful, but there are really three or four or five, pretty much five great Alexander biographies in the last 200 years. And this is one of them. So I was very happy to find it. And this volume is oversized because it's heavily illustrated, where a normal hardcover of Peter Green's Alexander biography would not be. It would have a little insert of 7 pages. So there you go. That was my Brattle trip this morning. We have Peter Green's Alexander the Great. That's fantastic. I will put this. I also have a slightly larger and heavily illustrated edition of Mary Renault's book on Alexander. This will go right with that. We have a new translation, a new to me translation of Catullus. If I ever encountered this, well, I haven't actually looked through it yet. It's possible that I've encountered this and just forgotten. But if I have ever encountered this, it was a long time ago. Then military history. We have the Punic Wars by Adrian Goldsworthy. We have Shiloh, a new study of what we know and don't know about Shiloh. We have the Shipwreck of Their Hopes about the Chattanooga, the various battles at the Chattanooga. We have This Terrible Sound about the Battle of Chickamauga. We have the Canterbury Tales of Chaucer, translated by Burton Raffles. We have the Ancient Roman City. Oh, you're not even going to see these things. The Ancient Roman City, part of a series that is just great. and 2 mass market paperbacks: The Black Death by Philip Ziegler and My Lord of Canterbury about Thomas Cranmer. So we'll see what we make of that. I'll be doing some rereading this weekend, definitely. But anyway, that was my Brattle trip. I'm going to wrap this up, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.